staffing and things of that nature. But the issue of the FLSA in particular, in the wages, hours, and working conditions, I interpret hours as kind of work scheduling. And so for years, and you may not have been here, I know Mr. Wheeler, you might have been at the tail end of when there was this big argument over 410s and 5 versus 5/8 at the police department, because there was a language in there that said schedules at the police department will be either 410s or 5/8. And there was an interpretation by that administration that they could just pick and choose. And yet, for years, there was this, and I know that there's been some kind of soreness over past practice, but there's been a practice of negotiating at every contract negotiation. And then both sides have discussed it, and would there be some give and take? And I guess in the interest of working hours or working conditions, so the wages, the hours, and the working conditions, I guess it would fall on the latter two, from my perspective. Does the language in this code have to be so narrowly defined? And I think what Mr. Flynn was trying to get at was that you shall or you must, rather than, you know, it is the intent. Maybe something that's softer that gives us a little more latitude to bargain with, and to allow that management to have their rights and flexibility, but to have a little more stability and consistency to meet the collective bargaining intention. Because I've heard the mayor say, you know, we're not trying to end collective bargaining. So I want to know why the language has to be that restrictive and why I can't allow more.
I think the question is, what does the assembly want to have happen? Currently, the sponsors are interested in a scenario where the administration has clear guidance that there will not be double time, for example. So if it's the will of the body that there's less clarity in terms of what's going to happen, then the assembly can change this. But the goal right now is to have clarity that there's not going to be double time offered or accepted through contract negotiations. So really, it's up to the body to decide, you know, how much do you want to leave open-ended and varied through 9 different contract negotiation scenarios, or how much do you want to have clarified up front in code that this is going to happen and this is not going to happen, and these items are subject to negotiation and these other items are not. So right now the goal is to be very clear that we're not going to provide for double time as an option for overtime. But you know, if the body wants to go a different direction, you certainly can.
With that, you know, I going back to what Mr. Trainee was talking about with the records clerks or any other, is there anything, as I read through the definitions in particular, what I'm concerned about is when you're talking about direct services, as I use those definitions, it seems to apply more in the managed competition with what shall not be or shall be. But does, under the current working rules in 3.70, there was language in here that addresses specifically persons who work confidential information. And for the love of God, I'm trying to remember how we can get to that point. I mean, how many members that are currently represented are eligible to basically be told, if this passes on this date, you're no longer a member of the bargaining unit?
Confidential.
Well, before you start, I think, are you talking about the definition on page 3 of a confidential employee?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Let's go ahead, Lon.
Right. That is a common confusion. Confidential employee, as it was in the original ordinance that we've been dealing with, as it is in the code that we've been dealing with, and as it is here, is confidential from the point of view of handling management information that is confidential in the collective bargaining or grievance or contract dispute sense. The economic information, how is the municipality doing, what are they paying other people, what are their plans for the negotiations, what are their plans for bargaining, what are their plans for grievance, disciplinary information. That's confidential stuff that you would normally hold away from the other side if you were in litigation. But it's not employees that handle confidential information.
Right, like in police and fire, you have HIPAA situation
Exactly.
for law. You have
The example we were just whispering about is a payroll clerk. They handle confidential information. They may have access to your social security number and other information about you, but that doesn't make them a confidential employee. So this last sentence that we're adding in tries to help with that understanding, that it's really about handling information which contributes significantly to the deliberative process, right? So high-level confidential information that is used for policymaking purposes, those employees are more likely to be confidential employees versus the office workers and clerks who handle specific information like your medical records or your. No, but what I'm saying is that they can't, obviously have restrictions about how they use the information, but they're not necessarily confidential employees.
I think that would be helpful for me also to have kind of an idea, maybe a few examples. I guess principally I wouldn't be so concerned if I knew that it didn't overreach, if you will. Get us to the point where we're taking out 100, 200, or 300 employees and say, you no longer can vote one because.
And I use the example again as a nurse that works for DHHS. They handle confidential information
Absolutely.
every time. It doesn't make them a confidential employee. They are bound again by HIPAA servicing citizens in Anchorage or anybody that could come in and need the service. But they're handling somebody's individual confidential information. It doesn't make them a confidential employee under the definition here.
At the police department, every single person in that department handles confidential information.
Absolutely.
And the vast, vast majority are in the bargaining unit and should be in the bargaining unit. What this deals with is the chief secretary. That could be someone who would be coming across that, okay, this is our strategy to deal with.
As I understand, I mean, in that particular example, the chief secretary is an executive appointee. I mean, they're already
Exactly.
not represented.
And that's where you need to look at things as a whole, as to, all of the, the functions and responsibilities that they have, not just on a single, the do's and the do-nots that they have or do every day.
And then lastly, Mr. Chairman, I'm thanking for the indulgence. And I'll probably come back around here for a minute. I'm thinking a few more things, but I do, given this information, it really seems to, already I'm starting to feel a little calmer about the pressure that we're all under on trying to make such sweeping changes. My concern about the managed competition, and not that I'm opposed to managed competition program, I am opposed to putting something in code that says we shall have something and we don't know what we're looking at. And I'm really concerned about that. So like Title 21, we acknowledge it may not be perfect and we may have to come back and amend. I would be more than willing to put, it's the intent of the municipality to amend this code to include managed competition, and if the bargaining units are giving something saying they're not going to be objective, they can extend or whatever to be inclusive. I just urge you to look at this and see if we can give it its good due. I mean, I think we're moving on pretty fast to try to put something in and wedge it, and I think we could get it. Your own words, Mr. Chairman, let's get it right. Take our time and get it right. Thank you. I'll come back.
Okay. I have Ms. Frasca, Mr. Flynn, Ms. Osander, and Ms. Johnston. So, Ms. Frasca.
Thank you. On page 22, regarding impasse, on lines 38 and 39, it talks about that the parties, when they're at impasse, the municipality may then implement its last best offer. So what would happen if you chose not to implement the last, since it's a may?
What it is leaving there is some flexibility. And being public sector, we're kind of a hybrid. But what happens is if we get to impasse, we've gone through all the procedures, we're at impasse. There may be some discussion as to what is going to be the best to keep those negotiations going, to keep employee morale. Is it better to leave the employees under the old contract and not impose the last best offer and try to reach a new contract? Or is it best to impose the last best offer and start moving forward from that basis? And that is a complicated decision because each negotiation is very different. And an administration last best offer could, actually mean a pay cut. It certainly made dramatic change, and as we know, change is something people don't like.
Okay, so it keeps it as an option.
It keeps it as an
what's
option.
laid on the table. Okay. Regarding managed competition, and I know we've had some discussion about what happens, that over the next 180 days we'll get a plan. And so is it anticipated that that's a plan that will require assembly approval? So that's one question.
I think the answer is yes. I think, there's one or two contracts that have what might be called managed competition language in them. I think what we're trying to do is develop a program that would work across all of the contracts, set up the parameters of what we look at and how we analyze it. We would be looking to the assembly to approve that plan.
So, at the risk of suggesting something, sort of a different perspective, but since what you said this morning was that the goal is to not have the contracts prohibit managed competition. You don't want to have it be off the table. You want to have that as an option. So would an option be, an alternative to have stated in here, that no collective bargaining agreement can prohibit managed competition, or approaching it that way? I mean, does that make a difference? Does that meet some of the concerns, as opposed to prescribing it? Can I ask that question to the sky? So,
The sky answers yes.
So anyway, so it's a thought.
We'll be happy to noodle that, if you will. and,
Okay, yeah, me too.
discuss it with the sponsors and see what they want to do.
Okay.
I think there was some concern that with such a simple sentence, that would be even worse than what we've put in as far as what's going to happen.
Okay, because it's not prescriptive then, at least in my thinking, okay. So that's fine. So in terms of standardizing health benefits and insurance options, is that something that then also, once you've worked out what the options will be, is that something that then comes back to the assembly at all?
What,
Is there a,
there would be a process to bring things forward. Again, the concept would be, again, we would put things into the personnel rules because it would